everyone, this is National Master Dennis Monokroussos, and today we're going to take a look at least the first part of a really crazy and hard-fought game between myself and International Master Emery Tate. This was played recently in the Indiana State Championships, and well, you can find the results online if you look hard enough, but you'll see what happens in the end. So anyway, very, very exciting game. Both of us played really well in parts and not so well in parts, but I think you'll find it very, very enjoyable and entertaining and hopefully even instructive too. So here we go. I'm black and Tate played e4. Alright, no problems here so far. e5, knight c3. So he plays the Vienna, and I think he had hoped to surprise me by playing this, but I'm pretty well experienced with e5, and even if I didn't, let's say, have recent experience facing the Vienna, pretty familiar with it. So I mean, if you play e5 for very long, you're going to see it, and well, you need to be ready for it. Okay, so knight f6, g3, d5. This isn't the only way to play against it. I believe in Marin's books, well, the one book that's relevant to this is, I think, called Beating the Open Games. He recommends bishop to c5 instead, but I like this. Very straightforward. It's the main line. Now, it might seem a little bit peculiar, though, because after ed, knight d5, bishop g2, it seems as if black is justifying white's opening, now that black is allowing white's bishop to be really well placed. So, I mean, it's hitting d5, and, of course, beyond that, he's hitting b7. So, isn't this a bit of a concession? Well, it is true that white's bishop is quite useful on this diagonal, but black gets something out of this too. And after knight takes c3, b takes c3, bishop d6, knight f3, and both sides castle, it's safe to say that black is in good shape as well. So white does have pressure on b7. I mean, he's going to put the rook on b1, and of course the bishop on g2, whenever the knight moves, is going to have its influence as well. But white's queenside pawn structure is not very good. I think we might have even discussed this pawn structure in the past, though, from black's point of view. So this quartet of pawns is a bit fragile. It's certainly not an ideal structure. Black has this very good pawn on e5, so this is certainly nothing for black to be too upset about. And I think this is enough for white's advantage to be very minimal, if existent at all. So it's somewhere between just equal and maybe fractionally better for white. So the only reason I think white might be even fractionally better is just that he has a little bit of an initiative here. So black still has to kind of finish up his development and finish neutralizing this pressure against b7. And once he does that, if nothing too serious has happened, he should be equal. All right, well, in this position there are a lot of options, and the move I played was well, I played it because I was a bit confused. So as I said, it had been a long time since I'd at least looked at this line. It's a fairly rare way for white to play. So I had vaguely recalled, I think from Gary Lane's book on the Vienna, that sometimes black plays c6 and knight to d7. Let me get rid of the arrows here. Okay, so sometimes black plays knight c6, as I said, but sometimes he plays c6 and knight to d7. And so I thought, I didn't realize or didn't remember that these were two distinct plans that black can choose from here. Rather, I was thinking that in some way black was supposed to wait and see what white does to remain flexible first, and only then choose. So for that reason I played rook to e8. But in fact, as I said, I was mistaken. So I was supposed to choose between the two. The rook to e8 is playable as well. Alright, so the main move is knight to c6. And this is what I would play in the future. Alright, now here black has two main plans that he has to worry about. White can either play, let's say, rook to b1 and d4. That would be one way to proceed. Try and open the position up, and by opening it up, get this bishop on g2 right into the game, trying to put pressure on black's queenside. The other plan for white is to just play d3, so a slower plan, and just keep the center nice and solid, and try to restrict black's well, the bishop on c8 in particular. All right, so let's take a look at a couple of lines. All right, so if rook to b1, rook to b8, d4, and then here bishop to g4 is the most common move, but I think simply bishop to f5 is very good, putting pressure on this c2 pawn and putting the bishop on a very nice centralized diagonal. And here I think black should be equal. Okay, so the second line after knight to c6 is to play d3, as I mentioned, and now black probably should just pin the pawn. The bishop on f5 isn't hitting c2, so it kind of bites on granite there. All right, so h3, bishop h5, rook to b1, rook to b8, g4, bishop to g6, and now knight to g5. So here we kind of see, well, we do see the idea behind d3. So black's bishop has been blunted. The white knight could come to e4 in some cases. And again, we've got this pressure on b7. Black might also have to worry about f4, conceivably in some lines too. And after a double exchange on f4, white has the very nicely placed rook on f4. Could also consider going laterally to put further pressure on black's queenside, or to help maybe augment pressure on the f7 point. So this is a possible way for white to play. Black should continue here with bishop to e7. So this prevents f4 because black would simply take. So if f4, this is poor, because e takes f4, and white can't recapture because then he just loses the knight here. Alright, so that would be bad, clearly enough, so white should retreat. But by retreating, he gives up some of the pressure on the diagonal. Now black should play f5, so it slightly weakens his pawn structure, but much more importantly, it's opening up white's kingside a bit. So after g takes f5, bishop takes f5, I think black is really in quite good shape here. Certainly equal. Better, probably not, but equal. And white should probably play knight to g3 now, and the game just goes on. I mean, it's a complicated position. Both sides have their advantages and disadvantages. All right, so that's knight c6. I would suggest this as the way that you could play this position if you chose to get it in the first place. All right, another possibility besides rook c8, which I played, and c6, which I mentioned, and knight to c6, which I recommend, is Tate's suggestion of f5. Now this looks a little bit loose to me, but it certainly is in keeping with his style. So he's a player with a very aggressive, very straightforward kind of style. So he can play any kind of position like any competent player. I mean, I've seen him defend. I've seen him play more passive positions, and really throughout most of this game too. I mean, he's playing relatively quietly, but his love is to attack and to go forward and to try to knock the other guy's block off. f5 is in keeping with that, but it feels again a little bit premature to me. In any case, it's not a terrible move, and certainly is worth considering. Okay, so I played rook to e8, misremembering what I was supposed to do, and now Tate grabs the initiative with the move d4. Okay, so I don't want to play e4 here. Again, I feel like this would be surrendering some squares prematurely. So here, I'm not sure if white should play knight to g5 or knight to d2. Probably, I mean, knight to g5 is the most attractive looking move here. And certainly I don't want to play f5 because of queen h5. That would be kind of unpleasant, hitting both f7 and h7. Maybe I can survive it, but looks fishy. So bishop to f5 would be the move, but on bishop to f5, then rook to e1. And I guess I just lose a pawn here, so this isn't much better. So anyway, e4 doesn't work very well, and now you see why rook to e8 is perhaps a little bit funny. All right, so here I played knight to c6, and he played rook to b1, trying to keep my bishop on c8 at home. And after rook to b8, there are some other problems. Actually, I could play h6. h6 might be a very good move here. The point is to simply keep his knight off of g5, and since there's no threat for white immediately in the position, I'm okay. So I have time to do this, and maybe I think h6 is a little bit easier. Okay, so instead I played rook to b8. Certainly a move I want to make, but maybe I should have waited. Okay, now here he had an interesting option. So he played bishop to e3, and bishop to e3 is certainly not a bad move either. He's threatening to maybe play d5 and then grab the pawn on a7 in some cases. All right, not necessarily right here. Or also can maybe play d takes e5, and it'll work out similarly. Knight takes e5, and then bishop takes a7. So this is a very interesting way to play, and we'll see what happens. But another thing that he could have tried instead was knight to g5. And one point of this, well, a couple of points. So first of all, he's threatening to play bishop takes c6, exploiting the pin on the rook. If I play bishop to d7, takes care of the knight, well, the problem then is queen to h5, and already my position would be resignable. He's got the double attack on f7 and h7. I can only protect one. Well, I could play queen takes g5, but that's probably not such a brilliant idea. So other than that, I can only defend one of these pawns at a time, and the result is I would be losing here. Okay, so the more obvious move is bishop to f5, but now it looks like this has another tactical problem. Rook takes b7, and then bishop takes e6. And it seems at first as if white is just winning a pawn scot-free. Now, as it turns out, remember what I said about white's queenside being kind of weak? Well, after rook to b1, bishop takes e8, queen takes e8, black has very good compensation in the position. First of all, I have the bishop pair. Secondly, his queenside pawns are targets. And third, his kingside light squares are kind of weak. So I may continue with moves like h6, h6, then queen to c6, which hits this pawn, but more importantly, grabs this diagonal, and then bishop to h3, or maybe bishop to h3 first and then queen to c6. And you can see that black has tremendous compensation here. Now, I'm certainly not claiming that this wins by force. I mean, white can meet queen c6 with d5, for instance. But still, I mean, if you look at all those bad pawns on the queen side, not to mention the holes on the king side, black has excellent play here. So Tate made the right decision when he played bishop to e3, I believe. Okay, now, again, I have to be careful. I can't play b6, which I would like to play, taking care of the b pawn and the a pawn, because, once again, knight to g5, discovering an attack on my knight on c6. And after bishop d7, again, queen to h5, it's lights out. So, I can't play b6, and instead I played the move bishop to g4. Now, I'm threatening to play e4 here, so white doesn't have time for moves like d5. So, for example, if d5, whoops, I already got it there, d5, knight a5, the idea of just dropping this guy in on the beautiful c4 square, bishop a7, well, I just play rook to a8, and then next move is e4, and thank you very much, nice knowing you, black wins. Okay, another way to play, or another try for white that's not so good here, after bishop to g4, is d takes e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes a7, again, because of queen f6, ganging up on this poor, defenseless knight on f3. So black would win in this position as well. So Tate played, I think, reasonably, and probably correctly, with h3, chasing my bishop away. Well, I can maintain it, but now he always has the option to break the pin with g4 if I play bishop to h5. But here I threw in a little swish and zug here. I was worried after bishop to h5 that he might just break the pin and then take twice on e5, and then I'd have to worry about my queenside pawns. But it turns out that I was perhaps a little overly concerned. So g4, bishop to g6, d takes e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, and here probably bishop takes e5 is what I was considering, but rook takes e5 is even better. But I think bishop e5 is also playable. And after bishop a7, rook a8, rook takes b7, rook to a5, and again you can see that white's terrible queenside pawns are paying off for me once again. So I win the a pawn directly. The c pawn will come under a double attack as well. So once my rook is here, I've got two guys hitting the c2 pawn. And even if I can't win it right away, I've still got a terrific position. I mean, his extra pawn is a really lousy doubled and isolated, for that matter, pawn. His kingside is a bit airy, so you may have to worry about my ganging up on the dark squares there with something like queen f6 and queen e5. So this could cause some havoc in his position. And even if it doesn't right away, it's just always a possibility there. Another idea, maybe queen at h4 and h5. Again, trying to blast open his king side. So here I think black has no problems and is probably maybe not better, but certainly at least equal here after rook takes a2. Okay, so bishop to h5 was probably the right way to play. I think what I did was okay, though. So I played e takes d4. Now, the drawback of this move is that it allows him, of course, to undouble his pawns. So that's a plus for him. The advantage, though, is that now I don't have to worry about d takes e5. So he can no longer pry open these diagonals pointing to my queen side. So I gain something, I lose something. C takes d4, bishop to h5. Now queen to d2. So he breaks the pin. This also gives me a moment, though, so now I can play b6. So again, we're both kind of happy here. He plays c4, and now we've got a position that's really kind of characteristic of a Petrov defense, really. I mean, the bishop on g2 is a bit weird for the Petrov, but that aside, I mean, it's a very typical Petrov sort of pawn structure. I'm missing my center pawns, and all the other pawns are pretty much at home. He has these hanging pawns in the center, and, well, hanging D and C pawns with open E and B files. So it's right out of the old Petrov playbook there, with the exception of the white fianchettoed bishop. Now, what I want to do here, and this is typical against hanging pawns, when you've got hanging pawns, when they're side by side, if they're secure, then they can be pretty good. So they control a lot of squares here in the center, or near the center. So this is pretty useful for white, to cover these three squares here. It kind of restricts my minor pieces on d6 and c6. So that's a bit uncomfortable for me. On the other hand, these hanging pawns can be a weakness. So if I can force them to advance at some point, then hey, I'm going to be in really terrific shape once that happens. So if he pushes the c pawn, let me get rid of the colors here again. If he pushes this pawn, then at some point I'm going to have the opportunity to perhaps occupy the d5 square. So I'm going to try to blockade there with my knight maybe. So at some point play knight e7 and knight to d5. On the other hand, if, let me get rid of this, if he plays c5, I'm sorry, if he plays d5 at some point, well then I get the e5 and c5 squares both for my pieces, and that especially would be really good. I mean, my knight can maybe go to e5, then the bishop could go to c5 depending on what's going on, or I might play knight to e5 to d7 to c5, or knight a5 to b7 to c5. I can illustrate that. So I can go that way maybe, or this way, and occupy the blockaded squares. So if his pawns get fixed, then I'm in terrific shape. So that's really the battle. White wants to keep his pawn center fluid and keep them controlling all of the squares along my fifth rank, whereas I want to try to induce them to advance. And that's really what happens. That's kind of the enduring strategic battle that takes center stage for quite a while. All right, but nevertheless, tactics do show up, and quickly. All right, here I play queen to d7, so just trying to finish my development, protecting my knight on c6 against any nasty little discoveries that might happen with his bishop. And also, maybe I'm going to play rook b to d8, so I'll get that piece to a useful square. I mean, it's not doing anything on b8 anymore. Okay, and as we'll see, I maybe have another idea behind this move too. All right, now here white has a few possibilities. Now one kind of crazy line that I spent quite a bit of time looking at is him playing c5, trying to exploit the unprotected position of my queen. So you can see that there's this line up here, and my queen on d7 is unprotected. So the point is that after c5, if b takes c5, d takes c5, looks like I could be in a little bit of trouble here. Now, I think actually at this point I'm still okay, but I'll just show some of the lines that I was considering here. All right, so one kind of fun line that I looked at was rook takes b1, rook takes b1, bishop f3, and then queen at f5. So I've got a little double attack here. I'm hitting f3, and I'm hitting b1. So white would play queen to d1 at this point. And now, objectively, well, actually I'm in trouble here because now I'm under a double attack myself. So he's threatening this, and he's threatening this. So I calculated bishop takes g3, and so one line that I looked at went like this. So f takes g3. Actually, let me just say the line out loud, and let me suggest that you stop it after I say it and see if you can figure out what's wrong with the variation. All right, so f takes g3, rook takes e3, bishop takes c6, rook takes g3 check, king to h2, queen takes h3, mate. Okay, so again, f takes g3, rook takes e3, bishop takes c6, rook takes g3 check, king to h2, queen takes h3, mate. Okay, so what do you think about that variation? So stop it if you want and try to refute it. Okay, I'll assume you've done that, and now you're back, and now I'll show you what's wrong with that line. Okay, so f takes g3, rook e3. Here, okay, not bishop c6, this. Of course, you could play bishop to g2 as well. I mean, that's another problem. But the biggest problem is that after rook takes e3, white has the very nice little shot, rook to b8 check, forcing mate. So I have to play knight takes b8, and then queen to d8, mate's next move. So that would be a big oops. Okay, but white can also just play bishop takes c6, another possibility. And here I have various options, like queen to h3, but they all seem to come up a little bit short. So for example, just bishop to g2 and he's okay. Or if I play rook takes e3, again, the back rank kills me. Okay, but of course not f takes e3, and I made him there. Okay, so c5 is quite fun and quite sharp. I can also try bishop takes f3, bishop f3, and now bishop takes g3, and then queen takes h3. But he just plays bishop to f2, and really I just have nothing here at all. So I'm simply down a piece. I've got a couple of pawns for it, but they're not really meaningful. His bishop pair is very powerful, and this would just be no good for me. Okay, so I would have just played bishop to f8 and, taken the game from there. So again, remember, I want him to play c5 as long as I can blockade on d5 at some point. So if I can do that, I'm okay. And so this is what I would have played. I would have just retreated the bishop and maybe followed up with knight to e7 and knight to d5. Maybe I have to do something about knight to e5 first. So maybe I throw in f6, or I play bishop takes f3 and then play knight e7 d5. Okay, so that was one idea for him here. The second idea is king to h2, and we'll see why that's an important idea in a moment. So he played queen to c3, and the idea, or at least one idea, is to try to push me back with c5 and then knight to e5. And also perhaps he wants to put a rook on the d file, and then c5 maybe increases in strength. At any rate, I'll ask you to try to figure out what black's move ought to play here. So what should I do in this position? Okay, so again, this is a good place to maybe stop the recording and do your best to figure this out. It's actually a very interesting spot, very critical moment in the game. Okay, I'm going to assume, or at least hope, because I think this really is worth your while to try to figure out. And I'm going to assume that you have done that. So here I think I have two moves that are both pretty good, but in different ways. Now, I think probably the best move is the move that I didn't make, though what I played is I think, interesting and not bad. But the best move is probably just the positional move, bishop to g6. So the idea of this is that now my bishop really isn't doing very much on h5, unless I'm going to take on f3. And by playing bishop to g6, I have the idea of following up with bishop to e4, which is a terrific square. I mean, it's beautiful. So the bishop would be very well placed there. It also helps with my plan of someday maybe controlling the d5 square if he advances the c pawn. And just in general, the centralization would be quite good for me. So here I think, I don't know if I'm better, but I think I'm quite comfortable in this position. So instead, and I should point out that this is actually quite an important game. I mean, this is a last round game, and as long as I didn't lose the game, I at least tie for first and maybe just win clear first. If I win the game, I'm clear first. If I drew the game, I would have tied for first, and I think been first on tie breaks. Whereas Tate was half point behind me, so he needed to win, and if he won, then he would get a tie for first place. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm trying to play the best moves I can, but I also have half a mind on a draw. So if I can find lines where I'm very confident that I can draw, then I'm going to go for it. And that's what I thought about this. So I wasn't 100% sure that this would be drawing if he went into the main line, but I felt pretty comfortable about it. That at worst I would be slightly better and maybe just drawing outright. Okay, so here's what I came up with. So I played bishop takes f3, he played bishop takes f3, and now I played queen takes h3. So this would win a pawn were it not for the fact that he can simply take my knight on c6. So now here's the key line. Bishop takes g3, threatening queen h2 mate, of course. So he should, well, if he moves the rook, then I have at least an immediate perpetual check by just dropping the bishop back and forth. But in fact, I think I simply win here with rook to e6. And I don't believe that white can defend in this position. So this would be peachy keen as far as I'm concerned. He's more than welcome to go for this. The key line is f takes g3. Okay, so I've sacrificed two pieces here, but I get one back. Queen takes g3 check, bishop to g2, rook takes e3. So I have 3 pawns for the piece, and while they're not really a factor at this point, they're still there, and he's kind of tied down. So I have some nice activity in the position, and really what I'm hoping in this position is that I can simply hold on, that I can more or less prevent him from making progress. Now, objectively, I think maybe white has a minuscule edge here. So queen to c2, rook b to e8, rook b3, maybe something like g6, queen f2. So this is one possibility here. And objectively, I think white probably is a little bit better, but it's very hard for him to win this. And if he isn't fast, I'll play king g2 and king f6 and g5 and start walking these guys up the board. So let me enter the stuff. So white has to be pretty fast. If he's not fast, then I think black for sure is going to have tremendous play. So hang on a second while I have a little water. Okay, I'm back. My thirst has been alleviated. Okay, so instead of going for this, he spent a lot of time considering this. I don't remember exactly how long. I guess I can look it up here. Where is it? I've got it somewhere. Yes, here it is. Yeah, so he spent, I don't know, looking. Yeah, he spent over half an hour. Yeah, he spent half an hour, 29 minutes on this. Not over half an hour, but almost half an hour. And finally decided to play bishop to g2. And this is actually a pretty reasonable decision as well. I've won a pawn, but I traded off an important bishop, so now he still has pretty good compensation. I'm not sure if it's objectively enough to say it's equal as far as the computer's concerned, but who cares? I mean, practically speaking, it's still anyone's game here. Okay, so I have to play queen to d7. Now he plays rook f to d1, and now he's pretty well coordinated. So all of his pieces are on really good squares. The rook on d1 is, again, it's there to support either d5 or c5 possibly, because if I open the d file, that gets his rook right into play. And of course here we're just walking to a pin maybe. The rook on b1 is pretty good. It's on a half open file, and it could maybe come up and over. So I don't know. I'm not sure where it would go. Maybe g5, maybe h5, but the point is, it has prospects going that way. The bishop on g2 is beautiful. The queen on c3 supports c5, and it could also prove well placed on the long diagonal. And really only the bishop on e3 isn't doing anything too brilliant, but it's about as well placed as it can be at the moment too, and it's going to be in the right place if the center opens up. So this is actually a pretty good position for white. Okay, well, how about for me? What do I have going for me aside from being a pawn ahead? Well, again, I think I'm flexible in the position. Most of my pieces are reasonably well placed. And at this point, I mean, I essentially want to keep everything safe and nice and tidy here for a few moves. Okay, so I played bishop to f8, getting it out of the way. So now, if he plays c5, I don't have to worry about any tricks. I can just play knight to e7. Also, I should point that out right away. I wouldn't mind playing knight to e7 here, with the idea of bringing the knight to f5, or in case of c5, being ready to go to f5, d5, but I have to worry about c5 in response. So c5, and my bishop is all of a sudden trapped. So that's not satisfactory. So that's another reason why I played bishop to f8. So my bishop wasn't really doing anything on d6, except maybe preventing him from playing bishop to f4. So here I unclog the d file, I make knight to e7 possible, and maybe the bishop can come out on g7 at some point. So yet another point. So I think bishop to f8 is a very nice move. Okay, now he played a3. One point of that is to simply prevent me from putting a piece on b4, which I may do at some point. And the second idea is he was maybe hoping to tempt me a little bit to go chasing that pawn. I sort of half-heartedly do that a little bit later. We'll see. Now here I make an interesting move. I don't think it's a bad move, but maybe it's not the best move. So here, probably the best move. Actually, let me again encourage you to stop the lecture at this point and see what you can come up with here for white, or sorry, for black. So what should I do? So I had several good possibilities. Okay, so I'm going to proceed now. And I think maybe the most normal move, and probably the best move, is just rook b to d8. So if you look here, I mean, all of my pieces are doing something kind of useful. So my knight on c6, it's centralized, it controls d4, it could come to e5 in some cases, it might go to a5, and it's alright even where it is. My queen is reasonably placed, so it kind of holds everything together. My bishop on f8 is doing a job. I mean, it's controlling this diagonal, which is important, even if maybe the other diagonal would be better. The rook on e8 is well placed. So the only piece that's not really doing anything is the rook on b8. So rook b to d8 would be a very good logical move. Another move that's worth considering is g6. So again, just being consistent with the plan, or part of the plan, starting with bishop to f8. So I'm ready to recycle it to a new and better diagonal. But I chose plan C, and I actually had kind of an interesting trap behind it as well. So I played knight to e7. Now my idea is that I want to play knight to f5, as well as, of course, being ready to play knight to d5 if he ever plays c5. So you might think here, well, gee, what is it that white is going to do in this position? I mean, his pieces look nice, but how does he make progress here? Well, one possibility might be to play the move d5. Oops, I already got that there, sorry. So one possibility is to play the move d5, because now I'm not really that well set up to construct the blockade. So if, for example, I played a move like, I don't know, knight c8, well then white could play d5, and this would actually be really good. For one thing, I can't take on c5 because my rook is hanging. So that's pretty good for him. A second point is that, well, if I can't take there, then I don't have any blockade on d6 either. And now I have to worry about moves like d6 followed by c6, and he just starts crashing through here. So this is pretty awkward. Now, knight to f5 might look a little bit more logical, so that way on c5 I can just take. Right, so here if c5, I can play maybe bishop takes c5, or even better, of course, I would just take on e3. I mean, that's kind of silly, and then take on c5. So this would be absolutely splendid as far as I'm concerned. Actually, maybe he can play c6. c6, knight takes d1, knight takes c3, de, rook e8. No, that's good. So I'm up 2 pawns there. All right. So so this looks like this should be good, but the problem with knight to f5 seems to be the move bishop to h3, pinning the knight, and now while I'm busy trying to untangle, well, I can still maybe play c5 next move, or you can just try to build up on this poor knight while it's pinned, and I could play g6, but maybe now I'm weakening myself on the diagonal, so maybe g6, and then possibly bishop to d4, maybe queen to d3 first, and then you can take twice on f5. All right, so this looks like it's pretty good for white here. So what do you think I had planned? And actually, well, let's look from here. So knight f5, bishop h3, knight c8, c5. So take a minute again and see, well, you might want to take more than a minute. See what you can come up with here for black. All right, so this is, I think, one of the neater ideas in the game. Now, I think I could play knight to g6, actually. So knight to g6 might be a reasonable move that avoids all of that business. And again, notice I mentioned before that if he plays d5, he weakens the e5 square. So this is probably not such a bad idea. I can continue with bishop to d6, and then maybe bishop to e5 or knight to e5. This all looks pretty okay. But I had an even subtler idea, I think. Certainly a kind of a clever idea. So it's knight to f5, bishop to h3, and now knight takes g3. So that would have been a really fun move to make. All right, well, what in the world is the idea of this? Well, first of all, I'm threatening queen takes h3, which puts it in a man bites dog sort of way. Of course, white is threatening bishop takes d7. The key point is that I'm also threatening knight to e2 check. So it's pretty neat. After bishop takes d7, knight to e2 check, king g2, knight takes c3, I'm not only regaining the queen, but I have this fork on his rooks, which is crucial because he's hitting my rook on e8. So after bishop e8, rook e8, say bishop f4, I'll take this one, and I play bishop to d6, and I'm simply up 2 pawns for nothing, completely winning position. So that was the big idea. That was a neat little trap, but a positionally well-motivated trap. So it wasn't a cheapo. I didn't play something stupid in the hopes that Tate would fall for it. Rather, I was trying to do something in the interest of one of my strategic goals. Now here, white can actually kind of hold on and not be in too bad a shape if he plays, ironically, queen takes g7 check. So that would have been a pretty spectacular pair of moves. So I play knight takes g3, put my knight and my queen in pre, and the response is for him to sacrifice his queen for a pawn. So bishop g7, bishop takes d7, and here either rook to e7 or knight to e2 check, king f1, knight c3, and we make all the captures here. In both cases, I'm better. Here, I think I'm probably clearly better. I mean, my position's not spectacular, but it's more or less a clean pawn. And so even though the h7 pawn is the extra one, and it's not going to run that fast, I think after rook to e4, white has troubles. So I think I have very good winning chances here. It's not trivial. Okay. Also, I should point out, going back, if white tries king g2, which looks logical, protecting the bishop, attacking the knight, getting out of the fork, I just play knight to e4, and if he takes on d7, knight c3 is the same thing, and if he moves the queen, then I move my queen, and again, I'm just up a couple of pawns for nothing. So that was the neat trap. Also, kind of ironically, maybe rook takes e3 can be played. So I have multiple tactics here. And here his best move is to play queen e3, because if he plays f takes e3, I play queen to d6, let's say bishop f5, queen g3, I regain the bishop, and I've got 2 pawns and serious attacking chances for the rook. So material equality, or half a point ahead, depending on how you like to count, that sort of thing, and tremendous attacking chances, and his e3 pawn is weak too. So as I said, he should play queen takes e3 in that case, and knight e3, take this, take that. And because it's opposite color bishops, his drawing chances are really good. Now, opposite color bishops certainly don't guarantee a draw. I mean, so that's kind of a bit of urban legend. But here, this is a pretty favorable version for white of a defending side and an opposite color bishop ending. And of course, taking on a3 is no good. Well, I mean, I can take, but I mean, if I take, he just plays rook to a1 and gets the a7 pawn. And probably even trades rooks then. I'm not sure if I can avoid the trade of rooks. Well, sorry, bishop to d6 makes more sense. And, the point is that my back rank is weak, and I can't get my rook out of the way fast enough. So I can play this, but even so, he does that. And yeah, this is a dead draw. Okay. So anyway, rook takes e3 probably isn't as good as my move because of this reason. So in this position, I was hoping for, again, d5, but Tate, without seeing this, I mean, I asked him after the game and didn't see this idea at all. But maybe subconsciously, maybe he saw it, or maybe he felt, that h3 is kind of loose. So, I mean, I had hit him with a little tactic earlier with bishop takes f3 and queen takes h3. And this time before he put anything on h3, he wanted to make sure maybe it was over-defended. All right, well, in any case, we'll go ahead and stop at this point. So we're less than halfway done, but the action is only beginning. So far, we've seen some interesting tacking in the opening, seen some very interesting tactical ideas, and here we just have a very, very interesting position with a lot of imbalances. White's got space in the bishop pair. I've got a very solid position and an extra pawn, and maybe knight f5 and some other nice things coming up in my future. So this would be a really good position for you to analyze, try to figure out what's going on. Again, I think if you do analyze it, it'll help you understand a number of openings that can reach this kind of pawn structure, like the Petrov, but not only the Petrov. And anyway, so I'll leave you here with this. I hope you enjoyed it so far, and the action is only going to heat up in the next part, maybe even 2 parts. So thanks a lot.